This conference will now be recorded.
I have enough that there's a Larry online. Who is that?
Apparently he doesn't want to tell you, Scott.
What's that?
I don't think he wants to tell you who he is.
Apparently not. Now he can speak. Who are you, Larry? Well, his microphone is lit up, but I don't hear anything. We need for our secretary to come in.
Yes, sir. And Mr. Chair, we got an email from Mr. Leopold that suggested that he was having computer problems.
Oh, okay. He doesn't have a name of Larry connected to his name, does he?
I don't think so. His name is Kent.
Yeah, I knew that.
Yeah, and some of his emails include the name Hugo, so that might be a nickname, but I don't think Larry's a nickname.
Would be kind of a stretch, wouldn't it?
You never know these days.
Oh, yeah. Hello, Deanne.
Well, hello.
Welcome to our little foray here.
Hey, Diane.
Here's Roger. What's that?
Hey,
Here's Roger.
sorry, we were just saying hey to each other. I'm gonna turn off my mic.
Okay.
Scott
Who's
Roger
Roger?
might be our city manager. That might be who that is. Just a
Oh,
guess.
okay. Oh, we're having quite a crowd today.
We have everything except commission members. We're a little short on those.
Yeah, for sure. I still need my secretary.
Do you guys get outside today? It was gorgeous.
Say that again.
It was gorgeous outside today. I had my office door open all day. It was very nice.
Oh, it was. Roy, have you heard from Arch?
I have not, but I saw him today. He didn't mention an issue.
Afternoon, Paul.
That's me.
We have hit a quorum. I better.
I hope I don't.
Yeah,
I hope I don't.
yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah.
They still got a couple of minutes.
Okay.
This is Larry. Can anybody hear me?
Yes. Who are you, Larry?
I'm Larry Kern. I
Kern.
own
Okay.
I own a lot up on War Bonnet. I'm
Okay.
going to be building on it soon, so I just wanted to listen in, see what was up.
Okay. Very good. Glad to have you. And Mark has not turned on his mic yet. There's Arch.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm doing fine, thank you.
How are you, Art?
I'm doing fine, thank you.
Roy, I assume that the COLV is probably the recording apparatus. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good.
I'm logged on as Dave Street in the other room so that we can record these things.
Oh, okay, good. We may need that recording if Gage doesn't show up.
I'm here.
Well, good.
I don't want to brag on you guys, but we've had 3 different secretaries on this commission, and every one of them have done excellent minutes. And I also work for the Airport Advisory Board. Y'all put them to shame on minutes.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that, Roy.
Thanks much, Roy.
Roy, you could be a little more kind about the Airport Advisory Committee.
Their minutes have not been anything to write home about.
Yeah, but we hardly had any meetings anyway, so what was
Oh, I know, but I'm talking about historically going way back. Heck, the one guy moved and took the minutes with him. We don't have them.
He didn't want you to know.
I guess.
Well, I believe we do have a quorum, and although not all of our members are here, are they? I think we might go ahead and start. This is the February meeting of the Building and Standards Commission, the City of Lago Vista. Time is 7:02, and we're going to start the meeting. Start with, does anyone of the public have any comments that do not pertain to the items on the agenda? If not, I'll ask Mr. Dava if he has comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The only comment that I have today is that I think you have a lot of work ahead of you, and I expect that you'll be pretty busy all evening. You're going to begin, I think, by talking about a variance, and then hopefully you'll have discussions about the sign ordinance and also having to deal with possible licensure or something of that nature in which to deal with contractors that have abused the city's ordinances in the past. And hopefully we'll find a solution to bring that to a close by making a recommendation to City Council. So thank you very much in advance for all the work that you're about to engage in.
Thank you, Arch. First item on the agenda is a variance concerning the sign for the Lutheran Church. And I believe I'll have to read that. The number of the variance is 21-1773, sign variance. Consideration of a recommendation to the City Council regarding the sign variance application to exceed the maximum height and display area of the freestanding sign located at 21900 FM 1431, parentheses, Lot 1, Christ Our Savior Lutheran Church Addition, parentheses closed. Property within the Lago Vista ETJ. A recommendation from the Building and Standards Commission is required prior to consideration of the application of the City Council. Roy, do you have comments?
Yes, sir. Just to be brief, the ordinance, can get a little complicated, and the good news is most times, even when it is, we analyze it every possible way, and when the requirements are the same, regardless of how you analyze it, that gives us a certain level of comfort, and that's what we had here. Regardless of what category you look at, this thing apparently has an overall maximum display area of 32 square feet per side. There is also a 12 square feet limitation for what's called a variable message sign, which is an electronic sign. That seems awful low by current standards. I'm guessing that this ordinance is old enough where the more common variable message signs were the old LCD, with the red, with the scrolling thing. And those weren't very big. Those were just a scrolling message typically, maybe time and temperature, but not much more than that. By current LED sign standards, 12 square feet is awful small. So I think in some cases you have a dated ordinance, but once again, we'll be talking about how to address those. And the only serious concern we had to do with it wasn't so much the lack of the setback. There's a 10-foot setback required for these signs. It's more the vision triangle that we see as a long-term problem. If they ever widen FM 1431, and that gets into what is called the 25-foot vision triangle, there might be visibility problems coming out of that driveway. So if you are to approve this application, we would ask you include that stipulation that if that sign wherever finds itself ever being located within that 25-foot vision triangle, that it needs to be relocated.
Okay, thank you. Before I ask for a motion, is there any discussion that you would like to begin to talk about? Any of the members of the commission? All right, I'll entertain a motion
Just a real quick one. Can you hear me?
I hear you.
Okay. So I think that this whole variance is predicated on the hardship of the sign being hard to see because of the elevation of the driveway that was in there. Is that the case?
Yes, that was their allegation.
Okay, so we have a hardship. And I'm good.
I'd like to entertain a motion to. Did I hear someone comment? I'll entertain a motion to approve this variance. Do I hear such motion?
Mr. Chair, did you want to include that condition or not? Just so it would be clear.
It should be in the motion, yes, sir.
Yeah, well, I gave you options either way. It's up to you.
I'll second that.
Okay, that was Mike, is that right? Who made the motion?
That's me.
Anybody?
I did.
Paul.
I'm
I
sorry,
appreciate that.
who made the motion?
I did.
Paul Smith.
Yeah.
And Mike seconded it. Any further discussion with the motion? Would you clarify the motion, Paul, to include
Yeah.
qualification?
Yeah, to include if the road ever gets widened, the sign will have to be moved.
Will that satisfy your concerns, Roy?
Absolutely, yes, sir.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on the motion? All those in favor, sign by waving your hand. I see 3 hands. I see 4 hands. Gage?
Yes, sir.
4 hands. Do we have any noes? We have 1 no. The motion to approve has been accepted and voted on and passed. Vote is 4-1. The next item on the agenda is to discuss a recommendation for local contractors' licenses. This is kind of a difficult subject that we've talked about in the past. There should be a lot of discussion about this. We received a late submission of a recommendation from Paul Roberts and John Jacks. I have not had time to read it. But Paul, Roy, I'd like for you to make your comments, if you will.
Well, yes, sir, but mine are fairly easy. When we broached this subject before, we did not have Miss Silvera on our permanent full-time staff. And as a result, I didn't have anybody that could do a lot of research for me to try and see, how we could, talk more about the minimum insurance requirements and how far could we go and without running afoul of certain, state statutes and such. So now that I had her and she did some research, particularly on what other cities are doing in a very similar manner, and it appears we have fairly solid footing. And rather than speak for her, I'll let her speak for herself.
Thank you, Roy. Good evening, commissioners. So just a quick overview. I think Roy may have forwarded my email to you, and that really only included the information related to the insurance requirements. I took a look at what the city of Austin, the city of Dallas, San Antonio, and a couple other cities, smaller cities, are doing with regard to contractors, and it's not necessarily the licensing side of it that they're looking at. It's a registration program. As many of you know, Paul probably knows this very well. A lot of the tradesmen that work on these projects are required to have a license. They're licensed through the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation, or for plumbers, it's through the Plumbers Board. So the subs, the trades are, have their licenses, and therefore those who get licenses through TDLR have insurance requirements to get their license. With regard to kind of residential contractors, the kind of overwhelming process that you see through these other cities is a registration program that then requires, as we already require, that you to provide information, these applicants for permits, provide the information regarding their license and their insurance requirements. The city of San Antonio, I found, had kind of the most reasonable approach, or easy to digest approach. I think it would fit or mesh well with the way Lago Vista functions today. There are some statutory insurance requirements that exist today. Basic level of insurance for liability. And so for what I'm recommending is that we establish a program that requires a registration of the contractor, including information regarding their insurance, depending on what kind of contractor they are. For example, if they're a residential builder, they would have those minimum coverages that are kind of set in statute. $500,000 of minimum. Let me find the specific numbers that I have here that I sent out. The $1 million of combined coverage for certain at certain levels. The difference between that and, say, someone who does kind of home renovations that don't involve any structural changes, those insurance levels then go down to a $300,000 and a $600,000 coverage level. In Texas, workers' compensation insurance is not required. You can the companies can opt out or sign a notice that they are not covered. Any contractor that does business or work for the city, for a municipality or a political subdivision, is required to have workers' compensation insurance. There are some cities that require the contractors to have the workers' comp insurance, so that's something that you might want to discuss. The city of San Antonio doesn't require it of their kind of residential contractors. So that might be a good point of discussion for you. And I think, Roy and I had discussed and envisioned kind of a program where you have the registration. You have to be a registered contractor with the city to be able to take out a permit. And then there's a minimal fee that's associated with that particular registration. It's an annual thing. Some cities do it every 2 years. You pay the fee every 2 years. And so that might be something you want to look at. Do you want to look at them every year? You want to look at them every 2 years? It's like $50 fee. It's not a great amount, as long as they have registered with us, they have license, they have their insurance requirements, and they don't have violations. So if you do it on, say, a point system, if you have someone who has repeated violations of certain ordinances, that may cut against their contractor requirements, the registration. Either it may increase the fee that you charge them, or ultimately, if they have repeated violations of certain ordinances, certain parts of our requirements, they may not be eligible to stay registered, to have a registration with us, and therefore would not be eligible to continue to do business in our city. I think it'd be very important to look very closely at, what those stringency levels are. So I think that's going to be a big point of discussion about, how many points does it take before your fees go up? And then how many points would it take before your registration is denied for the next year? And so it's a pretty straightforward process. You're relying on the information that the licensing requirements at the state level, where those exist, and then requiring documentation for insurance where the state level licenses don't have the insurance requirement. And then of course the discussion about whether or not you want to have the additional requirement of the workers' comp be part of those requirements, given that it's not necessarily required at the state level, but we could require it at the local level if we wanted to. I'm happy to answer your questions, or feel free to discuss. I think it's certainly something very important for our city to at least help create some level of accountability. As y'all know, I'm also the city prosecutor, the municipal prosecutor, and so I see many of our contractors that get code enforcement violations on a pretty regular basis, and if there are some repeat offenders, there are some regulars that I see, and then there are others that have been doing business in Lago that, you know, maybe they'll have a blip every once in a while because, you know, something happened, but they're not a regular face in court. So.
Hey, Aaron, what are we requiring now?
So now we're supposed to be checking that they have their license. I don't know that we're actually requiring, there's no registration process with us, meaning anybody can take out a permit. If you take out a permit, we're supposed to be verifying. If you're required to have some kind of state level license, we're supposed to be checking that. I don't know that historically that's happened consistently, but I know it's something that our new staff are looking at closely. Carl and Tan are really on the ball, Roy's new folks. But the insurance, I fear that quite a few of the builders or contractors that are here local don't have the requisite insurance that you'd expect them to have.
And just to clarify, the license she's talking about is plumbers, HVAC, and electricians only.
Yeah. Okay, but they're not required to have insurance right now?
We don't have a local requirement, or without the registration, we have no way of monitoring that. And in fact, you know, Aaron uses a different term than I do. You know, what I'm used to is the city being a named insured, so that if they cancel these policies, we get notified.
That's an additional requirement that I would want to see, that we be named as an additional insured, and we have the notification requirement, and they're very similar to what you see in San Antonio and Austin. And that way we have some heads up in addition to the kind of minimum insurance levels, the coverage levels.
And what this does is kind of provides the basis for having a regulatory system laid on top of this, which is what I liken it to a driver's license program. You know, the more severe the violation, the more points you get, and the bigger the repercussions.
Okay, so just to make it clear for me, is Aaron is saying that we don't have insurance requirements at this point, and Roy is saying that we do have minimal. Is that correct?
No, we would be adding them with this program.
This would be new.
Okay.
This would be brand new.
At this point,
we would have to write an ordinance for all of this.
Okay, but at this point in time, there's no insurance requirement.
That's right.
Okay.
Additional discussion or questions, Jim?
So can somebody remind me again exactly what the problem is that we're trying to solve with this?
Yes, sir. I mean, it's lack of accountability. The violations are not, they're not stopping violations. The violators are chronic. The penalties are not severe enough, and they violate with impunity, I might say, some of them. It's not a small number either.
So we're only talking about electricians, plumbers.
No, we're talking about everybody now.
How about the general contractor? Are we touching them at all?
No,
Yes.
that's the change. We're talking about everybody now. Now we're talking about two different tiers, depending on whether they're remodeling contractors or general contractors doing structural work. And we were stealing that distinction from San Antonio. And this would allow us, for example, the fence contractors. They would have a lower level of insurance requirements, et cetera.
Okay.
So, excuse me, would we have some sort of permit police or something that would go around enforcing this? I mean, it sounds like it would be difficult thing to enforce.
We have the problem now with people without permits. You know, it doesn't really change that. Now, you might argue that it might incentivize more non-permitted construction, and that's certainly a possibility. You know, that they'll say, well, to heck with it, I'm gonna keep building. I'm just not gonna get a license or a permit now.
But I do think that's an important question to raise, which
Oh,
is that the meaningfulness of whatever we put in place is only worth something if we have the resources and the willingness to enforce it. If we don't have if we don't have both of those, then what we put on paper doesn't do a lot of good.
Right. There is absolutely the possibility of that. I wouldn't pretend otherwise.
So could a person actually build a house without a permit and somebody move in it without a certificate of occupancy? I mean, don't you at some point have to allow a person to move in it? Wouldn't you know that whether the house was built with a license or not?
Believe it or not, your title company should take care of that. But we have a couple of examples where the title company didn't take care of that. And that's recent. And it's hard to believe that those were either one of those accidental.
Well, if I may, Mr. Chairman, those were unique situations where the builder built the house and got temporary water service and whatnot through, as the builder, and then they sold the property to an unsuspecting purchaser who would not have known otherwise, and their title company, like as Roy said, didn't do the research. I think that for those properties, there were some permits pulled, but there were not full permits pulled. And what happened is we recognized when the homeowner came to us to say, I want to change the water into my name, our people looked it up and said, well, you don't have a certificate of occupancy for this property. And that's how we caught it. We saw our utility clerk saw that there's no CO because she'll check for that. And that's when we saw that some of the permits for the property had been pulled, some of the inspections had been done, not all of them. And then, the builder just bolted and sold the property. In one instance, the builder sold the property to a relative who then sold the property to the lady who was now trying to have the utilities put in her name. And so she was put in a very difficult position where she has a home, she's paid for it, she's trying to get the water in her name or the utilities in her name. There's no CO. We haven't done the inspections, except we do know we have some documents on that particular property, and we know that there are that the house wasn't built in accordance with the plans because the builder skirted part of the process. I don't know if they ran out of money or if there were other issues, but they were part of the problem.
Would it be inappropriate then in a situation like that to have some type of legal prohibition of selling a property that doesn't have a C of O?
Well, you already have that.
Yeah, that exists.
Well, did we hold that builder accountable for transferring the property without a C of O?
Well, it's not our problem. It's like I said, that should have happened by the title company.
No. What I'm saying is, did we have a restriction, a prohibition against selling a property in the city that doesn't have a C of O?
Our prohibition is you can't occupy a property.
But you can sell it without a C of O.
Yeah, I mean, you can sell it. You can sell a house that's barely been started if you want to, and have somebody else take up the responsibility of completing it. I'm not sure we could prevent that legally. It's our legal authority is preventing it from being occupied.
Okay, so what's the recourse when that happens, like Aaron was saying? That they built the house and they wanted to get the water in their name, and they didn't have a CO or they didn't have everything completely inspected. So what's the outcome of that?
They need to sue the people that.
Well, so for our side, they need to go through the process to have the property inspected, to have anything that's not compliant with our rules and regs corrected.
Right.
The burden ends up being on this person who purchased the property, and then they would have to go through the process to recoup any money that they had to spend to fix the property or bring it into compliance so that they could have the CO issued to them. And they would have to sue the builder or whoever they bought it from for, not providing it to them, or sue their title company for not finding that this wasn't habitable property. So that's their recourse.
But the city would not give them services, correct? Until all that was resolved.
We shouldn't.
The city doesn't. Is that correct? Not should have.
In this particular case, the one that I've been discussing, I don't know whether or not there was any exception applied, and the lady was allowed to put the utilities in her name. I'm not sure what
She is not, but the utilities were already in the builder's name under a temporary construction account. That's.
I remember this, y'all. The city council. May I be recognized?
So they do have the services as long as it's in the builder's name. Correct. Am I assuming that correctly?
Yep. They're paying the bills.
I'd like to get back to the agenda item. This is all very interesting, but how would the registration prevent that sort of situation from happening? How would it?
So it wouldn't necessarily, Mr. Chairman, it wouldn't necessarily prevent this from happening, but what would happen is it would result in violations by that particular, assessed against that contractor, and the contractor would then be assessed a number of points, and if they kept up with that inappropriate behavior, they would end up with so many points that they could not do business. They would not be allowed to take out a permit from the city to construct anything because they would have too many strikes against them. And whether it's a permanent ban or if it would be a temporary for a period of time, that's one thing. I think the one thing we also need to look at is, unfortunately, the way some of these folks work is, well, okay, you're banning my company ABC because company ABC had too many violations. Well, I'm just going to change my name to FGH. And so we'll have to look at who the responsible parties are. We'll have to write the ordinance such that not just the company, but the responsible parties behind that company, the people who hold the actual licenses, are held responsible, so they can't just change their name to avoid this particular restriction. So it's difficult, but it does work, and it does provide some level of accountability. It's one way that they know we're looking, we're checking, we expect you to have insurance. That in and of itself helps protect the homeowners on some level, because at least if there are the homeowners and the workers who are building these houses right now, I shudder to think what happens when the contractors don't have the necessary insurance and something happens on site.
How would this all be implemented? I mean, who's going to watch and take care of that? Who's going to see how the builders are doing what they're not supposed to be doing, and keeping a record of it, and therefore holding them responsible by putting points against their registration?
So that happens. That would happen.
Part of city government.
That's us. We're doing all of that now except assessing the points.
Right. And requiring the insurance.
Right. And that the registration fee would cover that cost. And the more points you get, the more your renewal is going to cost. So the more burden you are, the more you pay, is typically the way this works.
Understood. I was just concerned about the fact we don't have enough inspectors to watch over the houses, and you guys are so overwhelmed. I was wondering how that was all going to happen.
Yeah, no, the good news is we have a lot of help finding the violations, and they're not all safety related, but you know, we find a variety of violations, deviations from the permitted documents is a chronic problem, and those are, you know, those are easily discovered.
Roy, when we find those, is it standard to red tag the project, or how does the process work once you identify a violation like this?
We issue stop work orders, but those are occasionally ignored too. And believe it or not, you know, we typically don't go file for injunctive relief unless it's serious. And we recently had one that was borderline serious enough for us to perhaps have to go do that. But most of the time, it's just impunity. And once again, we're trying to create additional negative consequences for that level of impunity.
All right, I certainly see the need for this, and we've had quite a bit of discussion on it. Do we have any additional discussion concerning this topic?
And what the staff would be looking for is just tell us whether you want us to draft an ordinance on this basis or not. You'll have a chance to see it.
Discuss it further.
So what about the workers' comp part? What advantage would it be to us to require that?
So, you know, it really what it does is it protects the workers who are out here doing work on our projects. You know, that workers' comp insurance doesn't necessarily help the city per se, but it creates another level of accountability on the contractors. You're not going to have as many shady contractors who aren't willing to pay for that kind of liability insurance, that kind of workers' comp insurance. It's really a way to ensure that the quality of the contractors that are out here doing the work are at a higher level, because the little fly-by-nights typically don't have it. They do a waiver, or they sub out everything. They don't really have any employees, as you would say.
And as Mr. Smith probably knows, the guys that have a bad track record and aren't financially stable, they pay more for that same insurance. So you've got that hammer, you know, working in your advantage too. The sleazier the guy is, the more his premiums are going to be for that level of insurance.
Right.
Paul Roberts, did I see you raise your hand?
Yes, sir. So when I raised my hand, there was discussion about the sale of the house, and how did, you know, the certificate of occupancy, how did they get in it? I recall, if that's what I'm thinking of, Aaron, there were some people, some relatives, correct me if I'm wrong, I think there were some relatives of the builder living in the house at the time. The city council ended up waiving it and granting the approval of the certificate of occupancy. It came before city council.
They did not, sir. That's not accurate.
Different one.
Actually, what was in front of the city council was the waiving of the renewal fees for the project.
Yeah.
And they did not waive them, and that house still doesn't have a CO.
Okay, then I'm mistaken on my memory. Thanks for correcting me, Roy. So thank you for recognizing me, Mr. Chairman. Aaron, could we add E&O insurance as one of those requirements? Errors and omission insurance?
It's not typically done for registration requirements for contractors. You know, when those are typically things that that the contractor and the homeowner or the prospective purchaser, that's something that you want to make sure that exists. If you're the one who's it's your property and you're paying that developer or that builder to build your house for you.
And that's typically handled by a performance and payment bond.
Yeah.
That's the more common way for that to be handled, which, now we're getting into the next agenda item a little bit. But.
Right. And I think they are a little bit intertwined. On the one hand, we've got a situation where the city's trying to deal with several facets of nuisance builders, for lack of better terms, where we have builders who are doing work on violating our city ordinances, doing work on Sundays, or not picking up their trash. They're habitual offenders of all aspects of our city ordinances. And then the other aspect of it is to Roy's point, the next agenda item, what, if anything, can the city do to help protect individuals? So I guess maybe I'll save my comments for that agenda item.
Yeah, and once again, I think it was just a matter of terminology. Errors and omissions, insurance is what I have as an architect, as a design professional. It's professional liability. I'm not aware that building contractors typically have that. Like I said, they're covered typically by performance and payment bonds.
Right.
What I'm thinking of is some of my own personal experience and other instances that I'm aware of where the builder, where had there been E&O insurance, there might have been some recourse for the homeowner, because you do get these lower end builders and they are skirting the rules and they're not properly supervising jobs. They're not catching things. They do make mistakes. There are errors, there are omissions. And then you end up with a situation where if the homeowner can't finish the project themselves, self-finance, there's a very real chance that the house could go into foreclosure. The city doesn't want derelict or abandoned homes in the city. And it might be advantageous to that to perhaps make that a requirement if it makes sense to do so. And I guess, Aaron, when you researched those other cities, Dallas, San Antonio, and others, did any of them stipulate that as a requirement?
No.
Okay. Okay. I assume if it made sense or if it was even legal, perhaps they would have already incorporated that into their rules.
Well, like I said, the errors and omissions, that's really there to protect the property owner. We're trying to make sure that there's insurance such that if there is damage or loss of life or something like that, that there is a way to have those coverages protect either the workers or the people on site.
And a common problem here is them doing damage to neighboring property, fences, walls, landscaping. And, we suspect because they fight so hard that they don't have any insurance when they clearly damage neighboring property.
Or our infrastructure.
Damaging neighboring property, I think I know the property you're referring to regarding the adversely impacting neighboring property when they went in and tried to raise the grade of that property. Is there anything we could incorporate into an ordinance which would give the city recourse when the city is being, when the general contractor is attempting to, I don't know that defraud is the right word, but deceive the city, lie to the city?
Yeah, I think so. And the violation point system is something that typically is not necessarily immortalized in the ordinance, but is instead referenced in the ordinance and available. And like I said, that requires some work. And if it needs to address specifically all the problems we have here locally, and that can certainly be one of them. Once again, adding consequences that, the guys that violate with impunity and regularly, they need to not be able to get permits in the future. I mean, that's right. The ultimate goal.
Staying on topic on this
how
agenda.
How are you keeping track of that, Roy?
I'm sorry?
How are you keeping track of their violations at this point?
What that right now it's in an MPN in our record. It's like any other code enforcement violation. You know,
Well,
the
there
difference
is a
is
court system.
we would not only be keeping up with those for a record for the prosecutor, okay, we would be assigning points against their registration or license so that we're hitting them twice. And like I said, too many violations, now you lose your permit or your ability to get a permit.
Would they have,
Just go to court and defend yourself on one charge at a time, if you will.
Okay, at this point though, all we're looking at to be charging anybody would be the mechanicals, correct?
No, the idea is right now that, you know, the state takes care of the what I call the MEP trades. That's a state license. What
Yeah.
we're saying is, no, we're gonna license everybody.
The general contractors,
Gonna
the
register
residential
them.
contractors, the,
We're gonna register them, and you will pay a nominal fee for us to keep up with your points. And if you
Right.
have any, those are gonna cost you too.
Right, okay, so, but right now, everybody's not registered, is that correct?
Right? Nobody's registered.
nobody's registered.
All right, just want to make sure that was
Right.
correct.
would there have to be an appeals process put in place here?
Okay,
All right, we're back to the agenda item, and that is whether or not we want to request the city to come up with a system that requires insurance and registration of contractors.
Right.
That's an item on the agenda that we need to discuss, and it's already been discussed. And now I need to vote and decide what to do. So I have a motion to ask the city to come up with a document, a code, a requirement to do this. Do I have a motion for that?
Yeah, moved.
Paige, do you have any specific information you'd like to put into that motion? How would you like to word?
I think we're just recommending requesting that staff develop a draft ordinance that addresses contractor accountability.
Right. And any direction you want to give us about what's in it, feel free.
I'd rather see the first draft
No
before we
problem.
did that. Is that okay, Scott?
yeah, I like
That
that.
sounds good to me, Paige. We've had a motion. Is there a second?
I second it.
So,
Mike seconds it. Any further discussion to clarify anything?
I just had one question in listening to all this. The only thing we're really worried about are contractors. Because I know in Texas, a homeowner can do this work himself, still get the permit. It wouldn't infringe upon that in any way, would it?
No,
and it probably wouldn't have any real, what I want to call disincentive, because a homeowner's not going to be taking out a bunch of permits anyway, typically. You know, they're one-time guys. They're not looking to make a living taking out permits. So, you know, it's not something we're worried about creating a point system for homeowners.
Sometimes the devil is in the details, you know?
Arch, would you like to make a comment?
You're muted, Arch.
Your speaker's off, microphone's off, there you go.
Thank you. Thank you very much for recognizing me, Mr. Chairman. This is a question for Aaron. Aaron, could you expound on what you mean when you talk about having the contractors have a performance bond? What is a performance bond?
so typically for these types of registrations, payment and performance bonds aren't something that we would require. The city requires payment and performance bonds for city projects to protect the city. Homeowners can, in the contracts they sign, if you're having a house built, that could be something that they could require of their contractor to have a payment and performance bond. And payment bonds are there to ensure that all the subs get paid. And then of course the performance bond is there to ensure that the project gets completed, or that there's money available from the bond so that you can hire another contractor to complete it. But the payment performance bond is not part of this. It would simply be what I was recommending is simply an insurance, some liability insurance requirements for these contractors. Because it's not really the city's role to ensure that these contractors finish the project. We just want to make sure that there's liability insurance in case they damage our property, damage the neighbor's property. That's there's kind of a fine line between where our authority is and not overstepping that and stepping into the shoes of the property owners. For example, Mr. Roberts' proposal included some additional requirements that he wanted to see that, from my perspective, from the city's legal perspective, you would have to hire a team of attorneys or people with the right credentials to help verify this information, to go through the process that he was suggesting. And I think it's one step too far. It's not something that you typically see as far as what cities would require. We're here to try to create, typically what cities want to do is create some sense of accountability, a registration process, and to weed out through this kind of point system those really bad actors who are repeat violators, who cannot comply with our regulations, and therefore they can't get a permit to do business in, to build anything in our city. Most people learn pretty quickly, hey, they want to avoid racking up those points, and so they'll make a greater effort to comply. And the insurance is just a protection for the property owners, for the neighbors, for the city, liability wise.
But
The one area,
Go ahead, Art.
The one area that I would be concerned with is having a contractor start a bunch of different projects and have a lot of them incomplete for some period of time.
Okay.
So
We have a motion. We have a motion on the floor. It's been seconded. So let's call for a vote. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand so that we can see it and count. 5. I have 5-4. So the motion carries. Mr. John Boy, you have your work cut out for you.
yes, sir. Well, and I have help this time, Ms. Silvera.
That's good. The next item on the agenda is to discuss a method by which prospective homeowners can be advised as their rights and what the city is requiring, and be sure that they get
And
that.
that's almost
Go ahead.
we were almost already there. And then Mr. Davila's comment or question was a perfect example. What we need to do, we recognize that what he brought up is a real problem. And what we really need to do is educate the public about what they ought to be doing and the private sector services like performance bonds. And I'll give you an example. And I think I might have even mentioned this to Mr. Roberts. Whether you choose to pay for a performance bond or not is up to you. But if you don't ask about a contractor whether he can get one and what it'll cost, you're being really foolish. And one of the ways you'll find out about that is you'll find out what the insurance industry thinks about this gentleman's credentials and reliability. once again, the more unreliable he is, the higher his premium is going to be on a performance bond. And if he has a very poor track record, he probably can't get one at all. And like I said, but whether you elect to do that, we need to make people aware of all these things and all these private sector services that they ought to be doing before they trust somebody with $500,000 or so.
Oh, Dejan? Down? Did you have something you want to say?
Me?
Muted. We can't hear you.
I'm sorry, can you hear me now?
Beg your pardon?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. John Bax, yes.
Okay. I'm an attorney, and I've handled quite a few of these types of lawsuits against these builders. And I was the one that came up with the idea that we should have a little more requirements in terms of them reporting their judgments against them, or when these mechanics liens are being filed against them. And I guess what I see, and I don't have the same perspective as many of you do, but what I see is these builders come in and they draw well, first of all, they have these form contracts from these home builders associations. It gives the homeowners zero rights and gives them all the hammer. They make their draws on these jobs, and they typically draw out all of the profit up front, and then they try to hang on to finish the job, and oftentimes they don't. Anyway, it's a snowball effect, and a lot of innocent homeowners get hurt by that. And what I'm proposing, well, most of the homeowners are not sophisticated enough to know to go search the court records or the property records to see if these liens have been filed against this guy, or judgments have been obtained against this person. And as long as I've been in this business, and it's been a while now, I've yet to see any homeowner ask for a performance bond. And I think it would probably be cost prohibitive to do so on a, something less than $1 million job. In fact, I've only seen the performance bonds required in the public sector, where there's the county or the city or whatever is paying for the job. But the idea is that if they had to report, or somebody could report, and there was a database that the homeowners could check to see whether this builder is subject to all these to judgments and various mechanics liens, then it would give the homeowner at least a little bit of a chance to be able to find this out. I don't think that would take an army of lawyers to implement. I mean, I think it would be self-reporting or reporting by the victims of this builder. And talking about the points that could be assigned, there should be a slew of points assigned to a builder that doesn't pay his subs, or that takes off and doesn't finish the job. Anyway, I don't think that there is an architect, perhaps, is sophisticated enough to know to ask for this and to review the contract carefully, to know what to be looking for. But I promise you, the average guy out there, and even sophisticated people, I've represented investors that buy these homes and flip them, and that are hiring these contractors, and they just take their money and go. And they all have a shell entity. They'll set up a little LLC, has no assets in it. Any money that comes in goes directly out. And so you can knock yourself out, file a lawsuit against these folks, but you're not going to collect a penny from them. And as far as these things are criminal as well, oftentimes they are oftentimes fraud or violations of the Trust Fund Act or these sorts of things that actually are criminal. But I've had any number of cases that my clients have taken it to the DA's office and they have no interest in prosecuting it. And recognizing that they have limited resources too, but I'm just saying that I've yet to see a contractor that's ripped off a consumer that has prosecuted the case, and but I've seen plenty of clients come through here that got taken advantage of, and they had no idea. So I do think at a minimum, if you could keep a database, and I don't think it would take an army of lawyers. I think you could look in the property records once a month to see what mechanics liens have been filed. They're usually filed on the 15th day of the month. You can go through there and look and see what mechanics liens have been filed. The Austin Business Journal reports the judgments that have been entered. So I think at a minimum, if that type of information could be available for the public so that they could go and investigate their builder. The one other thing I would say is Aaron is absolutely correct in that they do tend to jump around. So they will have the shell entity, and as soon as that one gets in a little bit of trouble, they will just shutter it and open up the next one and keep going. I've had contractors in the middle of negotiations shutter the very entity that's responsible for the project and start up a new one, knowing that they're never going to pay a penny for their misdeeds. And anyway, from my perspective, I see innocent homeowners, property owners get taken advantage of a lot more than being hurt by having to pick up trash or working on Sunday or something like that. And I think this is something that could really be beneficial for the community. And I know Paul's lived in the community for quite a while now, and he knows, I'm sure he can reel off probably 10, 15 people right offhand that have been taken advantage of by these unscrupulous builders. And so anyway, that's the idea. And I know it needs some fleshing out, and that it would take some work to implement something like this. But the idea is that at a minimum, if you could have a database that would record this information, and it would have to be as to the individuals, the individual owners of these shell companies that these contractors set up. But I think it could be done. I think it could be very beneficial for the community out there.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Deanne?
Hi, yes. Hi, yes, thank you for recognizing me. I just wanted to follow up with Roy and just say, as a community member, that what Roy was suggesting and what Mr. Jackson followed up with, at least there was some overlap. It would be a great community service for this information to be posted as a resource for our new community members and existing whoever is gonna be building, because I think the city has access to lawyers and the websites like Mr. Jack just mentioned in Austin. So, and that would be a wonderful community service to add to what the city's website puts out there for us.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Paul Roberts? Paul, you're muted.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the commission, when I back in, I think it was in November, when I was soliciting the city council to put this very topic that you're discussing tonight on the city's future agenda items for discussion, and it was discussed, I suggested that it go to you guys to come up with some language, which it's here now. And I'm so happy to see this. I'm really happy to see you guys talking about a way to hold these, in the former agenda item, holding the builders accountable regarding our city ordinances. Coming up with on this agenda item, something, anything, even if it's, whether it be a database or as as Roy wrote on this agenda item in the packet, you know, even if it's as simple as a public awareness, just educating people, you know, all of us, we're only as smart as what we know. And I guarantee you, unless you've been through the process like me and other homeowners have been, you've been ripped off and almost lost your home and it takes you 2 years to get in, you're not going to understand and truly appreciate just how far these general contractors can go to do you wrong, and there is no accountability. So anything that the city can do to help people, educate them, a database like the Better Business Bureau has, something, anything, please make a recommendation to council, and let's protect our citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for your comments and your contribution. Roy, do you have something in mind that you want to discuss about this subject?
Yeah, sure. And it's more general information to understand where the complexities come in. There is a different problem with a custom house than there is on what we call spec houses. And, you know, I spent a good bit of my career as a private sector architect performing these exact services, but I didn't do houses that weren't outrageously expensive. I did commercial buildings only, but the methods that we would use to insure our clients are somewhat similar. But once again, you have to make the distinction that what you ought to do when you hire a contractor to build your custom home is a very different problem than when you buy a spec house from somebody, you know, that's doing a house in Tessera and it's ready. And there's a different set of problems. And I'm not so sure we can come up with a one size fits all that's appropriate for everybody, but we can show these people how to protect themselves the same way I did as an architect. And
Okay.
That's a good approach.
I don't think there's any denying that there is a need. Is this an item that we need to really recommend, or is this something that should be done by?
We just wanted to make sure that you recognize the difference between the approaches. And if you wanted us to deal with it in some other manner, we certainly want your input.
Mr. Chairman?
Okay. Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
For example, the city of Austin has a page on their website that says how to select a contractor, and it includes some general information about only, you know, getting 3 bids, requesting references, things like that. And some of the things that Mr. Jacks included in the recommendation that we received from Mr. Roberts, things like that could be included in that website to say, check here for material, you know, check here for liens, check here for, you know, the different things that could trip you up. And that could be provided as a public service, the information on how these homeowners or prospective homeowners can obtain the information and do the kind of background checks, if you will, on some level of these contractors. I just don't think it's appropriate for the city to step into the shoes of the individual homeowners to be checking these additional things that really aren't covered by our ordinances. But if the commission wants the city wants Roy and I to develop kind of what information you might want to put on a web page that says, kind of here are some recommendations from the city on how you kind of check out your potential contractor, we could develop a list with some links to Better Business Bureau, places like that, how to look something up on, you know, the deed records, or how to do that research.
And even private sector companies that will provide that service for you.
Right.
You could even put it in that little newsletter that's sent out every month.
Well, and that's just it. You know, I'll be the first to admit our website is not as effective as it ought to be. So exactly how to get the word out, we're open, you know, all our ears are open about how, but I can generate the education. I just don't know how to get the word out there. I mean,
I think-
it's what I used to do.
I think if you would start to put it on that newsletter, Roy, that goes out every month for the residents, that
Right.
that would be a good start.
All right, and that's, yeah, oh, go ahead.
Unfortunately, that doesn't go to prospective homeowners, though, does it?
Yeah, but they would talk to the people where the houses are being built.
Larry, you have a comment?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can.
I don't live in Lago Vista, but my lot's there. And I would like to have access to this information. So for me, the best thing would be to put it somewhere on your website, pretty easy to find, so I could go look this stuff up.
Okay, thank you for the comment. Do we, I'm assuming that you're asking us to formally make a recommendation to City Council, is that correct?
Well, Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
if I could, if I may make a suggestion for a recommendation to City Council, it would be to develop some type of a public awareness campaign. And on the other hand, and this might require further discussion perhaps, but a way to tie in establish a database that ties into the point system discussed in the former agenda item, to which people, contractors who have broken rule A, B, and C could, it could be added, that goes beyond the ordinances. If they've done something wrong, they could be, that could be reported, that database in the points, and thus
Absolutely.
additional points, which would impact them.
Failure to perform or pay subcontractors, I mean, that ought to be a huge point. I don't know how many, but once again, the idea that we would ignore that is not our intent.
So maybe if the recommendation, the motion could be to for staff to expound upon the former recommendation to incorporate an ability for such violations, the example that Roy just made, not paying a subcontractor, that is taken into consideration too in writing that draft.
Well, and Aaron and I haven't discussed it to this detail, but the way I had it in my mind, we would develop the draft ordinance to create this framework. It would reference this system, if you will, and devising the point system and how many points for how bad each violation is. I envisioned us coming back with you separately with that, after we have the ordinance ready and discussing that. And you can tell us what y'all think is more heinous than, which one of these are worse than the other violations and how many points you want to give it. And for what it's worth, Paul mentioned appeals and reinstatements of these licenses or registration. Every city I've been in, it's a board like this that does that. And in fact, sometimes that's all they do. They don't have the other responsibilities you have. That's all they do. They're the contractor's licensing board.
Hey, Roy, what do other cities do to try to educate their public?
I'm a big city guy. I've never worked in smaller cities. It's not as big a problem in bigger cities because they're industry groups. And the industry polices itself quite a bit more than they do here. If I were to tell you I knew, the unique sort of problems we have here, the answer is this is new to me too. You don't see this in large cities.
Well,
To this extent.
I keep going back to the thought about we've got ordinances and we've got codes out there that we're not even enforcing now. So how can we?
We're trying to change that, but I will acknowledge it used to go on, but
yeah, I'm trying to understand if we're not, I guess you could say, visible out there for the public to see us, then it makes it really difficult to try to educate the public.
Yes, sir. And I'll be honest, like I said, I know it firsthand how many calls I get because people ask questions. It's on our website, and I send them links all day long.
Yeah.
A
So
lot of it is about publicly shaming the bad guys. You know, if you publicly shame them, word gets around pretty quick, and they're not going to get business.
Yeah, but we don't enforce when we find out there's a real violation. We don't go back on the builder. We punish the resident, not the builder.
that's often the problem, and that's what this is trying to address in many ways, is to change that dynamic.
So does this require further discussion?
Yeah, I'm just thinking that we need to get on the builder heavier, because it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, Roy, but it seems to me like when we do have like that example that Aaron brought up earlier about the CO and the people having to move in, somebody should have been fined for that. Shouldn't be the person that was buying the house. It should be the seller or the builder. Those are the people that need to get the fines, and those are the people
Absolutely. Well, and you weren't around when I brought this up almost 4 years ago the first time, but I'll say it then and I'll say it again. The biggest consequence I know is if you take away a guy's right to get a building permit in your community. Now you're in his pocket.
Yep.
He's either got to go work somewhere else or not work.
I think we're going back and rehashing stuff we've already talked about. We have the agenda item, which is whether or not to recommend some way of informing the public to their rights and ways to protect themselves.
There are a lot of tools out there we need to tell them about.
Say again?
A lot of tools that if they knew about them, we think they'd use them. If we can somehow figure out how to tell them.
Okay. Now the question again, I'm asking you, Roy, do we as a commission need to make a recommendation to the city council, or is that something that the city management ought to recommend themselves?
I think it's appropriate for you guys to make the recommendation. I can't see how it would hurt.
I'll make a motion, Scott.
Okay, would you like to word the motion so that our secretary can record it, Paul?
Okay, I'll make a motion that we recommend to the city that they put some information on the website and also in that newsletter they send out monthly about cautioning people hiring contractors.
All right. Do I hear a second to that motion? Jim Kaysen seconded. Any further discussion? Meaningful discussion? We have a motion. Who's that? Is that you, Jim? We have a motion on the floor. It's been seconded. I'd like to know for a vote. Those that wish to approve this motion, say aye or hold up your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, thank you. Did you get that, Cage? Item 5 on the agenda, I believe, is asking our city development manager to describe the efforts that are being taken under consideration for the new inspection requirements and so forth. A few other items. Roy?
Yes, sir. And it's further along than I thought it would be when I posted the agenda, but it's about what I would call 90% complete. a list of all the things that we think we need to change in the procedures and the required inspections to address some of the chronic violations that are going on. Required documentation. You may remember when we did the landscaping ordinance that you guys were a part of, because people were, not being real reliable about the number of protected trees on the property. We required to get a registered professional land surveyor to certify that document. We've got a lot of similar problems we have about, the building heights and all that sort of thing. It's almost like every time we look at one carefully, the documents are questionable, and the height of the houses is questionable. And we can address that with ordinance changes and process changes. And like I said, we've been working on it for a while, but Carl worked his butt off this past weekend, and he's a lot closer to being through than I thought he would be. If I knew he was going to be this close, I would have given you the first draft. But I'm ready to send it to you and bring it back like the previous two agenda items. And when you see it, tell us to proceed or not to proceed.
Okay, sounds good. We'll be looking forward to seeing that.
I can fix it in about 15 minutes. That's how close he is, I think. You saw it too, didn't you, Aaron?
Well, if you'd taken 15 minutes before we came to the meeting, we'd have had it to look at, wouldn't we?
Yeah, but it wasn't on your agenda that I would do it that way. Aaron would have got mad at me. So.
Item 6 is a discussion on how to work on the sign ordinance. Do members of the commission have some suggestions on how we might want to approach that subject?
I would most definitely like to defer to Aaron about, respond to how do we go about doing this. It can get complicated.
All right.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, ma'am.
So, over the last, I guess, almost 2 years that I've been working with the city, I've had on a couple occasions, number of occasions, had the necessity to review our sign ordinance. And there are some pretty serious deficiencies with it, such that my recommendation would be that we kind of take a wholesale look and bring to you a revised version of kind of a scrap the current version, bring to you a new version that is modeled after something that we know is going to be accepted. There are constitutional First Amendment issues with the current version we have, such that little fixes really aren't going to help us. It needs to be reworked entirely. And so what I would hope would be appropriate is to kind of bring you this new version. We will weave in the kind of particulars that apply in Lago that will help us kind of tailor it to how we function. But because of the federal law, it's really unwieldy to try to kind of go in and tweak it at this point. We need to take a kind of a broader approach. So if that's the direction that you want us to proceed, we will look at kind of bring you a draft option that we know will pass constitutional muster, and then we can, you guys can have a discussion about where you want to make tweaks to it that would really tailor it to Lago's preferences.
We're not trying to liberalize or change the end results. We're just trying to make the process defensible.
Right. Legally defensible, yes.
Yes, well, that's what I meant. Sorry.
Okay. So that's an action item for you folks, right? And something we'll have to look at later. I don't believe there's much that we have to say about it at the moment until you come up with the draft.
Right, but whether you wanted us to bring that to a subcommittee or to the board as a whole and look at it first or what, that'll be kind of up to you. We'll do what you want us to do.
I believe that whatever direction the commission takes, it's going to depend on what your recommendations are. So I believe that you need to come up with some recommendations, whether it be a draft or bullet items or whatever, and then we as a commission can take a look at it. Probably a subcommittee would be advisable once we have the information to look at.
Right. And I think what Aaron's talking about doing is using some of the model ordinances that have been drafted in some of the surrounding communities that are similar to ours, and start with there and then go back, and if they're too not restrictive enough, compared to what we have now in Lago, make sure that we plug those restrictions back in. I think is
Right.
what.
Well,
Or
sure, you all have
a
plenty
big
of time.
group, or go back to the meeting at the house kind of thing, or whatever. That's up to y'all.
Well, yeah, we can spread out in the house, I suppose. Yeah, did you have a comment? Go ahead, Dan.
I do. Thank you for recognizing me, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple of questions. My first question would be in Lago, because I'm familiar with Harris County, but and in Lago, are there any roads like 1431, who's also regulated by the Texas DOT? I'm not sure where the breakoff point is for where they have input on signs for the freeway.
They do, and 1431 is that road, and the only
I'm
one.
sorry, Roy. I only heard the very tail end of what you were said because I was still speaking.
Yes, ma'am. They have jurisdiction over 1431.
DOT does?
Yes, TxDOT.
TxDOT does. So we would have to, their rules, boundaries, and regulations would have to be taken into account for at least part of our signage regulations as well. So that kind of foments my next observation is that I don't think the commission has monetary powers, but would it be worth considering to bring in an entity, an expert in the field, so to speak, for in order to be comprehensive and not end up with something that we have to continually tweak for the next 10 or 15 years, that to bring in an expert in the field of signage on this kind of small town that has a major street in it, and that's and a cooperative evaluation and verbiage that is, like Aaron says, legally defensible to consider.
Right. We weren't going to tell you this, but that's exactly where we got the model ordinance from, is from just such an expert. we were not going to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.
But the other thing you bring up, though, and I'll warn you, it's not just TxDOT. The state of Texas has regulations about political signs that will color what we do. Because of the constitutional restrictions, there are certain signs that we got to let be bigger than we want to because of that.
Right. I thought TxDOT included the state of Texas as well as the county, so I wasn't. I was thinking Texas and county.
They've got a silly political sign ordinance or statute that it's a bit of a problem. We hoped they would repeal it, but they didn't.
And even with all the breadth of knowledge that you guys have there, once you came up with something, and by looking at other small towns and going from what was fomented originally to have a final perusal of somebody who is a comprehensive expert in the field, as lots might be, again, worthwhile. It's not my money to spend, but worth thinking about.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Dan. So here again, there is no action for the commission this time, but we'll have to revisit this in the future when we have more information from the city. I have one more item that I would like to ask about, and this is for you, Roy. We've had a lot of discussion about the comparison of Chapter 14 versus Chapter 3, et cetera. And I believe you told me that you have someone working on that so that we need not spin our wheels for a while until we know more about what you've come up with.
It's kind of tedious, so she only does it for a little while every day, so she doesn't kill herself. But yes, she's comparing it line by line.
All right, for the benefit of the commission, would you describe who you're talking about?
Yes, I'm sorry. I get some of y'all have not met. We hired a planner to assist us. She's brand new, but we got her from the TxDOT, actually. She was a transportation planner. She moved to Lago Vista not too long ago, and she started working, remotely out of her house when COVID hit, and then she decided she really didn't want to drive to Austin to and from every day, and we welcomed the ability to hire her. In a former life, she has quite a bit of construction experience. She was the construction manager for the city of Tacoma, Washington, so she has a wealth of experience, and we're quite frankly fortunate to have somebody with those kind of credentials that kind of fell in our lap. But
you certainly didn't need any help, did you? You work on.
I'm sleeping 4 or 5 hours a day now.
Well, maybe that'll help you out a bit. We appreciate your letting us know the activity and the progress. Item 7 on the agenda is a consent agenda, which is review or the approval, comments, or corrections of the minutes for the meeting of January the 12th, 2021. I assume everyone has seen those minutes and has had a chance to review them. I personally have one comment and question. Paul Roberts, is he left? Was he in at that meeting? I know that Gage has him as a participant. Does anyone recall if he was there?
I'm pretty sure he was.
He was?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's good. All right.
It would be more noticeable if he weren't there these days.
Beg your pardon?
It would be more noticeable if he weren't in attendance.
Okay, all right. Does anyone else have any comments or corrections about the minutes? Do I have a motion to approve the minutes as written?
I'll make a motion.
Jim?
can,
I'll second.
Jim can make the motion.
So Jim made the motion and Paul seconded it?
Yeah.
Okay. Got that, Gage?
Yeah.
All right. Does anyone have any further discussion they would like to engage in before we start talking about future agenda items?
I've got one. I'd like to know how many violations we've had in the past on the permits. This year.
I'd have to get somebody to run a report, but we have it. But I mean, I don't look it up until somebody like you asked me for it. And
Can you do that, Roy?
yes, sir. There is there's a monthly code enforcement report that we publish on our website. I don't know if that includes the building violations or not. I've never looked at it carefully enough. I'm not sure. Do you know, Aaron? You're muted, Aaron.
I thought it did. I'm trying to look at it now to see if I can't send y'all a link.
It may just be the watering on the wrong day and stuff. Some of those that Crystal does, she kind of does in support of the permit folks. And I don't know whether she reports those the same way or not. I'll have to ask.
All right. Does anybody have any items they want to add to the future agenda? One item that I know we need to do is review the city draft of the consideration of licensing or registration and insurance requirements for contractors. Secondly, we need to determine what to do about the sign ordinance. If we have a draft, some suggestions and draft ordinance of the revised sign ordinance, we need to review that. Hopefully it'll be forthcoming. Does anyone have anything else? Gage, can I muddle that up enough for you?
I've got it.
Okay, we can clarify it later if we need to. Is there any other important information or discussion we need to have before we adjourn this meeting?
Just for official purposes, did we take a vote on approving the minutes or just get a motion and a second?
I don't know. I'm sitting here fumbling.
I don't think we actually took. I don't think we took a vote.
Yeah. All right. Those in favor of approving the minutes as presented, raise your hand for approval. Okay, all 5 of you. Take care of that, Gage.
That got it.
All right, the meeting's adjourned, 8:36 p.m.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you all for coming, and
Thanks
thank
a lot.
you for participating. And Paul's left.
Thank you guys for a very interesting meeting. It was really, really good to attend. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We look forward to seeing you again sometime. I guess we all should sign off now, hey?
Yep. Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you again.
Good night.